Hi, everybody. Dan Illman, Ashley Mailloux, taking a look at race number 12 at Century Mile on Saturday. Let's throw up the field. For the Grade 3 Canadian Derby, we're going a mile and a quarter. $200,000 is the purse. This is a really wide open field and a great betting race. 11 entered. Morning line favorite, the number 7, August Rain. He's very consistent, chipping in from Hastings.
It's an interesting field, as you mentioned, for a lot of reasons. And one of them also being this distance. There are a couple of horses that have gradually stretched out in distance, maybe have only gone around 2 turns once or twice in their careers. There's very consistent types in the field. And you can see when you go down the page, at least 4 or 5 starts back for several, they're coming from all over the place to sort of new to this jurisdiction and racing. And I think it's a great betting event. I think it's very wide open.
I think you're right that the distance could be the great equalizer in this race, especially if the pace is hot. And we'll throw up the Timeform US pace projector, and they believe this pace will be swift, with the number 2, Jay Dutton, who was the pace setter in the Sir Winston Churchill last time out at Hastings, expected to make the lead. McEwen didn't break well in his most recent start, the Manitoba Derby, but he showed speed in his prior 2 outings, and It's All Goodman is a horse that's very fast, and from that outside post, he's got to hustle.
Absolutely. I definitely agree with the 11 looking at just his running style to this point in his career, whether it's been sprinting around 2 turns. He wants to be very close to the action. I think he is a little bit post-compromised in this race. I mean, obviously he has plenty of time to get into good position going into the first turn, but he's going to certainly need to use his speed to his advantage. And a couple of other horses, I wonder a little bit about even the horse directly to his inside, Northern Force. I look at the Timeform pace projections here. He's a little bit further back. I wouldn't be surprised to see him a little bit more in the mix, just knowing he's coming out of a 6 furlong event.
And if this pace is hot, keep an eye on both the number 1, Rousette, and the number 8, Awesome Road. You'll note the LP flags over their chiclets. That indicates they have the fastest Timeform US late pace rating. As for the number 1, Rousette, none of these horses have gone a mile and a quarter, but he's certainly bred for it, being by Breeders' Cup Classic winner Blame out of a mare by Breeders' Cup Classic winner AP Indy. And maybe he had an excuse last time out in the Manitoba Derby. He had a tough outside post that day, was floated 5 wide going into the first turn, mid-moved into a fast pace, and then paid the price. His prior start on turf, I'm not interested in, wrong surface. The start before that at Churchill Downs was pretty good, albeit against 30,000 maiden sellers.
I think the big thing when you look at Rousset is where do you see him early? We saw the LP flag attached to him, but looking at his best performances, those being the 2 second place finishes in the maiden score, he was close in all of them. And the pace, moderate at best. I think when he, graduated, to me, it was a little bit on the slow side, very pedestrian-like fractions, very even fractions. He was able to carve that trip out from the front. I don't see him being in the front here. And I think the concern I have with him, can he close? We talked about last time out, he obviously got a rough trip in that race. We haven't really been able to see that from him on the dirt. So you'll certainly get value on a runner like him. You just have to decide what to do with him. And I really wasn't sure.
The number 2, Jay Dutton, shipped up from Southern California to participate in this series of stakes races in Western Canada for the 3-year-olds. And I thought he gave a good performance in the Sir Winston Churchill. He was involved in the pace every step of the way, and he only grudgingly gave way in the final 100 yards to be beat a half length. That being said, it's an extra distance for him today and perhaps more pace pressure.
Yeah, I think he's still going to try to chase the pacer before. Whether he can do that at the mile and a quarter trip remains to be seen, just like everyone in this field. We're talking about horses that have maybe gone a mile and a 16th, a mile and an eighth at best. Now, I wouldn't be surprised to see him now take a step forward, second start in the Barn of these Connections. He has a bullet drill coming into here, but another one who to me seems to be maybe a one sort of trip type of horse.
The number 3, McEwen, finished ahead of 3 of these rivals in his most recent effort. A race we'll take a look at right now, the Manitoba Derby. He doesn't change leads in the stretch. That certainly bothers me, as he is set to go a mile and a quarter in here. But all in all, it was a pretty good race because he likes to be forwardly placed. He broke last, rushed up to track the pace from the inside, and he's plugging on in between horses pretty decently. He earned a respectable buyer as well.
I think he's a very intriguing horse. When you take his one start at Canterbury out of the mix, I think he's at least shown ability in all 4 of his following starts. And I think When you look at the way he won his 2 races, you think, oh, he's got to go to the lead. I don't think that's the case. He showed that last time out. He showed that 4 starts back. We do think the pace will be hot in here. He's going to stretch out a little bit more from 1.125 miles to 1.25 miles. And I think at a price of 20 to 1, especially, he's intriguing in a spot like this. He should be somewhat forward, but he can at least pass horses in those final stages. So he's 20 to 1 in the morning line. That may be a touch high in my opinion, but I still think he could be certainly double digits.
Although the number 4 Classy City's most recent Buyer speed figure is a little bit light, I'd take that race with several grains of salt, or at least the number. He ran very well when winning this start over 3 of these common foes, and he did it at Century Mile. He did not break well at all, recovered quickly enough to sit a decent trip behind a fast pace, and he shows a lot of determination squeezing through along the inside to win.
Yeah, he kind of gets into a slugfest here, and all of these horses, they're trying to get up, and he ends up getting the job done by 3/4 of length. I think right about here, he takes off again. He's able to accelerate a bit forward, and I thought it was a good performance. You talked about the Buyer being low. I'm not really worried about it. I think 2 starts back, he just had nothing. I think it was a really sort of rare performance from him, because go down the page, doesn't matter where he's been, what surface, he's a consistent type. So I'm willing to forgive him. I think now he should take another step forward. And I thought his performance, I know it was sprinting on June 7th. I thought that was a very respectable effort. So a 1 in here that I think you at least have to consider in the exotics.
And as we said, the Buyer was light, but the 4th place finisher from that race came back to win a second level allowance race with a 75 Buyer. Skipper's Pride is the number 5, very lightly raced, still has some upside, and has shown a lot of potential. He's hit the board in all 6 starts, including a 3rd last time out in the race we showed with Classy City. That was his first start going around a ground, and he might just be coming into his own at the right time.
Yeah, I think he is a sleeper for those exact reasons. Going 2 turns once again in his career, I think he can take a step forward. And I know he was still beat by 2 lengths, and there was no way he was getting to the top 2, but at least he still tried. I think, it's a tough ask to go from 6 furlongs, 7, to stretch out in those subsequent starts. I really don't think he's done anything wrong. And another one that I think in terms of trip, he should be close enough to the pace. I feel like with 1.25 miles, I don't necessarily want to see a horse on the lead or dead last. I want that sort of stalking trip, and that's the trip that he figures to get.
It'll be a big class test for the number 6 Lord of Battle, as he makes only his 2nd lifetime start, but he certainly deserves the opportunity off a blowout victory in his debut going a 2-turn mile, where he battled for the early lead and then destroyed the field late. It's going to be a lot tougher from a pace standpoint, as well as the obvious class issues.
Yeah, the class issue is one of them, just facing winners for the first time now in a graded stakes event. I also think, what did he beat in that field? And when I investigate further, the horses that have run back, they have not performed well. One of the horses came back to be second, was in a $16,000 maiden claim and only got a 39 Buyer, and the other one got an 11 Buyer speed figure. So just not sure what he faced that day. And I just feel like this is probably a tall ask for him second time out.
August Rain, the number 7, is a 5-time winner, and he's arguably the horse to beat in this race off an excellent effort at Hastings, going a 3-turn mile in a 16th. Let's watch the stretch run of this race. August Rain will end up finishing 3rd. This race went to deep closers, and August Rain was involved late on the backstretch, entering the final turn with an early bid, and he's just going to get run down late. Maybe he moved a little bit too soon. It was another good performance for a horse that really showed a ton of heart, scoring 2 starts back, snatching victory from the jaws of defeat in the final 100 yards.
And that's typically what happens. He makes that late charge, and a fair bit of the time he's on the winning side of it. If you go back to his last 4 or 5 races, he has not won 2 of those races, but he's been there every step of the way. And unlike others, I think he's a little bit more comfortable even being another length or so off the pace. And I agree, maybe the timing of that last ride threw him off for a bit, but it was a blanket finish. Everyone was charging at the end. I think when you look at this race on paper, he's arguably the horse to beat in terms of his accomplishments. His running style should play very well to the 1.25 mile race. And I have a hard time, poking holes in him. If you're going to poke a hole in him, maybe you just say, hey, he does win a lot, but he also gets in those tight photos. But at least you have to use him in your top 3.
Well, August Rain might be the horse to beat. The number 8 Awesome Road might be the key to this race. We've seen trainer Robertino Diodoro work this trick before, bringing horses up from the States and performing very well in these major races in Western Canada. The problem I have with Awesome Road is he was the favorite in the Manitoba Derby last time out, and while he was involved early in a fast-paced race, he was hard-ridden and all in and had no response in the stretch. Quite honestly, he was bad there, and he's going to have to call upon some of his prior races.
let's not forget, he's 1 for 8 in his career. He does have a third place finish, but you go down the page, I can realize that he's been in against some tough horses, right? Mystic Dan, Honor Murray. We're talking about horses that went to the Derby. Even in his subsequent starts at Oaklawn Park, you can say he probably faced tougher than this group, but he still wasn't getting the job done. Sure, some of his figures are a little bit better than others. I really just have flaws in his last 2 races. In the Texas Derby, I know he was a big price, but still well beaten, split that field. They gave him time off and he comes back, and I just don't know what you do with the Manitoba Derby. The only way you can make an excuse is you say he needed a race off the freshening. But I have a tough time just making that case and saying that I think he's worth a play here, especially if he's anywhere near 3-1. So I have a feeling you either like him or you toss him in a race like this, and I'm sort of in the latter of those two.
All depends on price. He's kind of light on the morning line at 3-1. The 9 is Shining Tiger, who was stuck in first level allowances at Century Mile before finding his spot in the Grand Prairie Derby of all places. Last time out at 1.1 miles, he was odds on. He got it done. Something tells me this is going to be a lot tougher.
It's going to be a lot tougher. I will say, though, he finally got to a distance race, right? We saw him in a lot of sprints before then, and he was okay, but he had been beaten by several in here, that including Skipper's Pride at Northern Force. And then he was finally able to win, but it was a short field. He only beat 3 other foes. I can't really give him a ton of credit for that effort. A win is a win, though. He's tough to back in here because we look at his running style prior to that. He does not have a late finish.
The 10 is Northern Force, and the big question for him is distance. He's stretching out 4 furlongs after his most recent race, a second level allowance at Century Mile, where he ran okay to be second behind the odds-on favorite. He didn't have the cleanest trip 2 starts back when beaten by a couple of these. I still think there's some potential here, but tough post, outside distance, and perhaps involved in a hot pace could all work against him.
Yeah, and we talked about with the time form U.S. pace projections. I think he'll be more forward than that showed, just because of his post, the fact that he's typically 2-3 lengths off the early pace in sprint races. His two-turn races, to me, they're lackluster, and I think my bigger issue is go down the page. He's never been close to August Rain when it's all been said and done. Several others in here, especially that race 2 back, the 1.1 miles, they were clear of him. He only beat 1 horse there. I think this might be a different story if this was a sprint, but it's not.
The 11 is It's All Good Man. And while this guy hasn't been able to carry his speed a distance of ground in his 2 routes, I think he performed well in both of those races, including the Manitoba Derby, where we mentioned that pace was very fast and contested. He actually opened up a clear lead in the stretch before tiring. The issues with Northern Force, the same with It's All Good Man. Tough outside post, will have to work to get forward position, and then the distance comes into play. 15-1, he's in good form. I prefer him maybe underneath, if at all.
I agree. I think if you're using him maybe in the bottom of the try or the super, and I think the concern is not his speed, but it's the post and then combining that speed. I think he needs to clear, he needs to get over, and you just wonder if it's going to be a similar story to last time where he does a little too much work early on and doesn't have anything left late, at least for a bigger share. So I don't want to knock his last 2 efforts. I think they've been good, but he would really need to take a huge step forward and be able to set some soft fractions here, which seems unlikely.
Let's take a look at our top picks for the Grade 3 Canadian Derby. You're going with August Rain. I am using August Rain in any kind of multiple race wagers. I think he is the horse to beat. And he's so consistent. He's also tactical. He can work at any kind of a trip.
Yeah, and I think that's what it comes down to for me endorsing him on the top spot, is that I can see him sitting, 3-4 lengths off the pace, and he hopefully makes a late run. It's well timed at the 1.25 mile distance, and he get the job done. On the other side of that, we saw last time out, he tired a little bit late, and maybe that's a reason not to use him. I know you use him in the 3rd spot, but you're hopefully going to get a price on the number 3 McEwen.
Well, if he goes off at 20-1, he certainly fits from a speed figure standpoint. He did finish ahead of several of these last time out. And I think if he breaks better, he can be a little bit more involved sitting in the second flight, not involved in a speed duel, but ahead of the true closers. I want to use him, the 8 and the 7. They, to me, look like the top 3 contenders. 7, 4, 5, and 8 for Ashley. 3, 8, 7, and 11 for me. It's the Grade 3 Canadian Derby, and it's a phenomenal betting race at Century Mile on Saturday. Good luck.